And hello, welcome to Social Justice Forums. I am your host, Daren, Jaime. Today, thank you for joining us. If you're joining and asking what this show is all about, well, we bring you a forum discussing and providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that so many people face, things from systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us better understand and address these challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. The bail system creates an unfair advantage and negatively affects individuals who have less money than others. The Bail Project pays for bail for those persons in need at no cost to the individual, but at the same time, they're trying to they're working to take money out of the justice system. They aim to actually create a fairer system, treating people as innocent until proven otherwise. Joining us now is the Bail Project's Chief Executive Director, David Gaspar.
All right, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you so much, and thanks for taking the time to really talk about this issue here because it is prevalent, and a lot of people have a lot of opinion on it, but certainly I'd love to get some clarity from you when it comes to the mission. So talk to us a little bit about the mission.
Once again, thanks for having me. The Bail Project is a national nonprofit dedicated to securing freedom for people who are jailed before trial, meaning before they've had their day in court, simply because they can't afford bail. Every day, we provide free bail assistance to those in need, ensuring that no one is forced to sit behind bars due to their financial situation. But our work does go far beyond bailouts. We're proving each and every day that justice doesn't have to come with a price tag. What began as our mission to pay bail for those who couldn't afford it became undeniable evidence that cash bail simply isn't about public safety. It's about poverty. It's about adequate access to mental health. And it's about adequate access to substance addiction treatment. We showed time and time again throughout our 30 plus thousand bailouts that when people are given support instead of punishment, they return to court successfully. They stay connected to their families and that they build stronger futures for themselves. Armed with this truth, over the years, we've been turning individual acts of freedom into a movement for systemic change. And today, we're working to eliminate cash bail entirely and create a more just and fair system, one that we believe is possible, where freedom is never determined by a person's wealth.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about why you feel like cash bail needs to go.
So, cash bail is a substitute for a judge making a decision. What we know, especially from the bail reform that's happened in Illinois, is that when you put a system in place where the judge actually has to look at the facts of the case and make a determination if an individual actually poses a threat to the community or to a specific person, or even presents themselves as a flight risk, then the judge has the ability to keep them in custody. But where those facts do not bore out the truth of the individual posing a threat of risk, then the individual is released. What we have right now, primarily across America, is that instead of looking at those facts, instead of making a determination, bail is set. And the bail is supposed to be this determining factor that if an individual has enough money, then they must present themselves as being safe for the community, which in fact is not true.
And when you look at where we are right now, obviously a lot of Americans are dealing with the whole issue of bail. And I know that there's a problem that you have too, that you feel is bail as though uses a sense of coercion.
Absolutely. Um, I'm somebody who's been system impacted. At 22 years old, I found myself sitting inside of a jail cell facing some serious charges. I had an eighth grade education, not a penny in the bank, not a family member that could have helped me post my bail. As a result, I took a plea bargain for nearly 21 years in prison, only to find out upon my appeal that I should never spent even a quarter of that time in prison. But at that moment, not knowing better, not having the resources, and not having anybody there that could actually walk me through what that process looked like and what my actual rights were, I ended up just giving in. I ended up only seeing one way out, and that was through a plea bargain. And it definitely felt like a very coercive moment in a period of my life.
David, does it feel like for people who've been held on bail, people who are on bail, that there is this presumption of guilt that's already there simply because you have bail on you?
I think as a society, we see it that way. I think when we think of somebody being in jail, we automatically assign a level of guilt to them. And that if the individual were to be able to post their bond and we saw them still showing up for work, still dropping the kids off at school, we wouldn't think otherwise. So I do think that there is a perception that comes along with individuals that sit in jail. But the reality is that overwhelmingly, the individuals in our jail have not been found guilty of any crime as of the moment that they're still sitting in that cell. And on top of that, most people sitting in our jails across America are there on low level, nonviolent offenses. And so I would just beg the question, why are they there in the first place?
Yeah. And when we talk about bail as a whole overall, I know that the whole racial issue comes up, and very much needed to be talked about. So let's get into it for a moment. When we talk about bail, from your perspective, discriminatory? Yes, no.
I would say that the evidence bores itself that race does play a factor. We've seen time and time again throughout America that bails for Black and Brown community members are set higher. We also see that bails for Black and Brown individuals are set where, in other cases, they're not set for individual of Caucasian, you know, background. So we do see that there's evidence there. We also see in our work that we are paying higher bonds for individuals that we post for that have Black or Brown or identify as BIPOC. So the evidence is there. I wouldn't have to even venture out to say that it's my opinion. We see it time and time again, and once again, it's not just our work, but it's studies across America that continue to show that as being true.
You mentioned something a couple of seconds ago. I want to go back to that for a minute. You said that in your own personal situation, you recognize that you could have been possibly a quarter of your sentence could have been reduced simply because of the fact of bail and how that plays a part. Take me through a lot of people's perspective from behind bars. Is bail one of those things that says, "Listen, I got a pressure here, and I'm potentially have the ability to like plead out early or plead wrong simply because of the whole, or plead guilty, if you will, simply because
Yeah,
of bail?"
yeah, absolutely. In my time, being in the system, I spent close to a year and a half in the county jail. So I have my personal experience, but I can also tell you countless times that I was sitting there just watching people on the phone only facing very low level charges but accepting pleas because they had to be able to get back to their job before they lost it. They had to be able to get back to their families before they lost custody of their children. They were worried about how they were going to pay their next rent, or how they're going to make their next car payment. And so you have those pressures weighing on you at each and every moment. It's not like life just gets put on pause while you try to sort out and figure out what's going on with your legal process. Each and every day that you're in jail, you are weighing your freedom and ability to go out there and not have your life completely deteriorate before your eyes, or you sit here and you fight for what you believe is just and fair. And the balance just isn't in your favor because each and every day that you fight for fairness, each and every day that you fight for justice, you're also making a sacrifice for not only yourself, but for your family and those that you care about.
Yeah. So let's talk about reform, a better way. A lot of people
Yeah.
say we need better. We need to do better. I know part of the work that you're doing, with your organization is really taking the look at bail and seeing ways that we can make this situation better. So, from your perspective, how do you see that happening?
Absolutely. The starting point for me is what is the process for determining someone's ability to be released? Meaning, what is the assessment process in which a judge is looking at evidence and making a determination on record as to saying why this person belongs in custody because they pose a direct threat or they pose a risk to the community or a flight risk? That is the starting point. Once we get that process implemented, then we can say that cash no longer has a place here. Because if the person is deemed eligible for release, they should be released without that financial burden. If a person is deemed to be a threat to our communities, then that person should be held, once again, without bail. But there's a bigger system that is at play here. And it is one where we have to acknowledge what are some of the conditions that are bringing people into contact with law enforcement in the first place. So when we start to say fairness and we start to say what does the process need to look like, we can say for a very healthy person to be able to be assessed makes sense. Here's the process. But what happens when you have somebody with mental health in front of you, and now they've had a mental health moment of crisis, and that brought them into engagement with law enforcement, but instead of taking them and getting them medical treatment, we're taking them to a jail. We're confining them without medication. We're only making their situation worse. So we also have to look at what are some of the alternatives that need to be implemented in order to make sure that we have a healthy process for how we meet our community where they are needed to be met at. So there is the safety piece, 100%, but that is about looking at facts, making determinations on record, and understanding why we're making decisions so that we can better improve upon how we make those decisions going forward. But we also have to address the poverty and the mental health and the substance addiction treatment that is needed as well, because these are individuals that need medical attention or they need financial assistance in ways that the jail system and the judicial system just cannot meet.
Can you give me a little insight here when we talk about pretrial? Because a lot of questions are concerned about pretrial, how that's handled, and how that could actually be an asset and also a possibility in this bail reform discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the reminder that I always like to give people is that pretrial just means that you have not yet had your day in court. It means you have not yet been found guilty of anything, and you have not yet been sentenced to any conditions of confinement or otherwise. And so when we talk about pretrial, we're talking about really what is fairness. And we know that, you know, the founding fathers of America said that no one's going to have their liberty taken from them without just cause and process. And so we're really talking about the process for what does it look like for an individual to maintain the pretrial conditions of release, that liberty that has been guaranteed to each and every one of us as Americans. And so that process of pretrial should be one about identifying what we can be doing to better support our community. What can we be doing to better understand the conditions that bring people into uh, contact with law enforcement? And how can we start to actually look at our communities and say, you know what, we have perfect blueprints where things are working really, really well. And how do we invest in those resources in the areas that it's needed most?
When we look at this right now, we see a lot of people who have really been affected, adversely affected by this. But from your perspective, I want to talk about the work that the Bail Project is doing because you guys have actually been able to transform lives and really transform the way a person has to deal with the system. So take us inside of some of the positive things that you've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most self-rewarding or rewarding aspects of the work is when you actually get to intervene in somebody's life in a way that brings them back into the household as a parent, back in their household as a contributor, back in their household as individuals who are contributing to their communities. I've had, the honor and privilege of being able to be a bail client advocate in my early days with the Bail Project prior to advancing in my role. And in those moments, you actually get to hear the human stories. I once bailed out an individual who, his wife and him had separated. He ended up losing a lot of you know, the access to the things that they had acquired together. Really sent him spiraling, and he turned to drugs to cope with the pain. And at the moment that I intervened, I was able to get him out. I remember his words saying, I actually thought nobody would ever care about me again. I thought nobody would, care enough about who I am as an individual. And not only was I able to support him, but I was able to connect him to resources that helped him with his housing, that helped him with employment, that helped him get clothes back on his back. And to be part of those stories is really impactful. But I also, once again, just referring back to my story, I like to tell people that I'm proof. I'm proof that our jails and prisons are currently denying people of their human potential. I am somebody that not only was unfairly sentenced incorrectly, But since I've came home in less than 2 decades, I've been able to become the father that I always wanted to be to my children, to be the husband to my wife that I always wanted to be a contributing community member and giving back. I've also been able to make a nice healthy career, for myself, and doing the work that brings me satisfaction. So I'm just one story of countless, and when I say countless, there's millions of us. One out of every three people either are or know somebody who's been incarcerated, and there's too much success in this world to say that the only ones who are succeeding are those who haven't been impacted by the judicial system. That would be a false statement.
So where do you take the Bail Project from here?
The Bail Project right now is really about how are we going to instill a better understanding of what is possible. And so some of the things that I've already shared is what is the judicial process for assessing risk, assessing threat or safety, when it comes to the community. How do we get more judges to buy in to the fact that this is something that is well within their ability? How do we get more states? How do we get more local jurisdictions to understand that by stepping in and saying, if we truly care about safety, then let's do what matters when it comes to safety. We continue to want to have moments where fingers are pointed and blame is assigned. But if we really want to bring a difference to the world, we have to start looking at the root causes. We have to start understanding what it takes for us to actually make right decisions that bring about health to our communities. And the Bail Project is all about making that happen, because with each and every bailout that we do, we're collecting the data, we're collecting the stories, we're having a better understanding of what's bringing people into contact with law enforcement, and more important, what is helping people get on that trajectory and that path for them to have successful movement forward post-release.
Yeah. And for people who want to get in touch, what do they do?
You can reach out to us through our website, bailproject.org. It is the easiest way to get a hold of us. If you have needs, we have a need help tab on there, but we also have all of our work represented on there, client stories and all. And I encourage everyone to visit it just to at least familiarize themselves with it.
Well, certainly I want to take the time to say thank you, David, for taking the time to be with us. David Gaspar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Bail Project, talking about bail reform and the success of his organization. Thanks for taking the time. Congratulations on the journey and continue the great work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, brother. All right. Well, listen, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more coming up right after this. And welcome back. In a world where thousands of youth embark on harrowing journeys across Central America and Mexico, the struggle for a better future often comes with unimaginable challenges. Drawing from extensive research and firsthand narratives of migrant youth in Los Angeles, our next guest explores the critical questions surrounding their experiences. Joining us is the leading immigration expert and author of Sin Padre Nin Papeles, Stephanie L. Canizales, and we thank you, Stephanie, for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you. And so when we talk about this issue, obviously you're an expert, and we want to definitely pick your brain a little bit to give us a little bit more that we could really talk about here. We hear a lot across America, migration statistics, the fact of how migration is impacting the United States. Let's just break it down from your perspective, and I'll ask you, when we look at migration and the migrant crisis, how do you view it?
I view it as a legacy of US intervention in the countries where people are originating from. I study Central American and Mexican youth migration specifically. We can look back decades and see that youth migration falls on the sort of tails of young adult men who migrated, single men to work in the US, followed by women, then families. And now we're at a stage where children are migrating alone to make up for the economic losses, the political repression, the violence that they're facing in their communities, in their countries of origin. And we can tie those conditions to US policies, US economic integration in the countries where children are migrating from.
And when we look at migration, obviously there's a couple of questions that we have, and there's a couple of questions that you maybe asked too. Separating children, right, or children being separated. Why do we talk about children being separated from their parents at the border without understanding why they come here in the first place?
Yeah, children are migrating on their own, right? Without parents, children are migrating with aunts, uncles, cousins. Children are also migrating as parts of a family unit, and then they become unaccompanied from their parents or caregivers at the border because of US immigration policy. We say that it is to protect children from potential trafficking. We say that it's to protect children from the potential of coming into the US with someone other than a parent or biological caregiver. Uh, all of those conditions, of course, can be true, but history shows and the research shows that this isn't the majority of the case. And young people are sort of collateral damage to any sort of deterrence policies, efforts that we make to make migration unappealing, to make life in the US unappealing. Again, kids fall as collateral damage as they're being made unaccompanied children.
Yeah, it's stuff that I think we do a lot of damage simply by just looking at the pictures that we see, reading statistics that hit the screen, and there's so much more to just what we're seeing across the screen and the statistics that we read. Putting a name to a face, putting some
Mhm.
real reality there. You've been behind the scenes. Uh, Take us there.
Yeah, so my book Sin Padres ni Papeles is translates to Without Parents Nor Papers. It is a study of 6 years that I spent in Los Angeles with unaccompanied young adults and teenagers who had all arrived in the US between the ages of 7, 10, 11, and 17, right? Really young children who came to the US as unaccompanied and undocumented young people. I love your framing, right? We hear these numbers 11 million undocumented people or 750,000 unaccompanied children. But as much as it is that very large, overwhelming number, it is also the one kid that I introduce in the introduction of the book, Christian, or Caleb, who really ushered me into what it means to be an undocumented, unaccompanied young person. They grow up as low-wage workers in factories sewing for J. Crew or Banana Republic, Old Navy. They grow up as dishwashers in our favorite restaurants across Los Angeles, as hotel janitors and domestic workers and nannies in private homes. These are young people who are coming to the US to make up again for the futures that they don't see in their origin countries, and really looking for an opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead. And as I explain in the book, not just as immigrants, but as adolescents, as young people who are trying to imagine futures as adults and as people who can participate in their society. And that's something I think we can all empathize with because we've all been teenagers, we've all been adolescents striving to be a version of ourselves in the future.
As you did your research for your book, I wonder what were some of the key takeaways that you found that maybe defied your expectations?
Yeah, some of the things I found that were really interesting to me as a human, but also as a sociologist, right? One, that unaccompanied children are not just migrating because parents are sending them off or because children are running away from something. There were so many people that I talked to who talked in very detailed words about the mindful, methodical decisions that they made to migrate for themselves and for their own well-being, but also to support their families. They talked about wanting to end the suffering that they saw their mothers enduring, their fathers, their grandparents, but also wanting their siblings to have a future in education or in employment stability in the origin country so they wouldn't have to migrate unaccompanied. So, this idea that migrants make individual decisions to get ahead is just not true. And then the other side of that, once in the US, I was really surprised to find that when organizations, when institutions, when adults in the room let children down, they often had each other's back, right? They became each other's resources, and anyone that got any sort of insight into how to navigate a workplace or find an apartment or even just make friends was very quick to share that information with someone younger than them or someone who was more recently arrived. And youth created their own culture of care and their own networks of support in the US context in the absence of us doing that work for them.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about your research because you do ask some interesting questions. I think it's one question that's worth asking that I'm going to ask you. And one of the things that you ask is, why are the people that are commenting on the plight of Latinos, rarely Latinos, and rarely researchers?
Why are the people that are commenting on them
Yeah,
rarely those folks? Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I think it begs to light the question, like, okay, if you're getting your numbers and you're getting your statistics, how about we talk to those who are in the trenches?
yeah. I think that's one of the main issues I bring up in the book, right? If we want to solve the unaccompanied minor crisis in the US, if we want to know what's happening at the border and how to solve the border crisis, we have to ask the people that are there. We often have this sort of top down perspective on a lot of issues, not just migration, but folks that think they know how it should be and don't, as you're suggesting, know how it is, like on the ground, often have a lot of opinions on what people should or shouldn't be doing. And in that sense, we end up criminalizing, villainizing, pathologizing, right? Like making the people the problem and not really looking at the structure. So when you talk to young people on the ground, when you hear their voices, and Sin Padres Ni Papeles really tries to draw on the terms that young people use, right? I don't come up with this sociological framework out of nowhere, but it's really borrowing from the language of the teenagers and young adults themselves and asking, what was the reason for your migration? What was it like to arrive initially, and how do you feel now, 10 years later? And I think when we come up with those conversations and we really understand crises from the perspective of the people experiencing them, we come away with more empathy and understanding. And that's what I was saying earlier, right? Coming away with an understanding of care, which is not something that I really went into the work expecting to find.
Yeah. As you did your research, what was your methodology and what was your approach?
Yeah, I'm an ethnographer. I spend a lot of time in community. I just watch people, and maybe that's part of my middle child syndrome where I was just like, what is everyone doing at all times in my family? But I spend time in community. I got to know a support group of young people. Again, informally, young people started their own group. It was about 15 to 30 people on any given Friday night, all unaccompanied, undocumented factory workers in downtown Los Angeles. I spent 7 months just kind of hanging out with them before anyone accepted to do an interview. I conducted 75 interviews total, all with young people who migrated as unaccompanied children, again, between about 11 and 17. And then, yeah, 6 years just going to churches, hanging out at donut shops, coffee shops, sandwich shops, any shop basically, hanging out at birthday parties and dinners, and really trying to get a sense of what does it mean? What does it look like? And how does it feel? Not that I would ever truly embody that feeling, but when you hang out enough, you sort of pick up on the threads, right, of how people experience a certain social location, the place that they occupy in society. And I was very grateful that these people trusted me enough to let me hang out, even as far as vigils and funerals of loved ones and of some of the young people that I'd come to know in the field also.
I want to ask the question about as you've taken this time in depth in the trenches, spending time. Then you look and you hear, a whole lot of policy that's being crafted from people who've never been. I call it supposition, hypothesis, all these things that are being thrown out there. in order to make the migration argument, from your perspective, where are we getting it wrong when it comes to the migration argument with regards to policy that maybe we don't know because we just don't have the boots on the ground?
Yeah, one of the things that I see, just based on my own work, is that we misunderstand a lot of the time the meaning of childhood. Maybe not in the US context, but in the origin country. And I see that a lot in conversations around migrant child labor, which is on the rise, right? 318% increase in child labor violations um, over the last decade. And part of what I see is an issue in our approach to addressing that crisis, the child labor crisis, is that we misunderstand what it means to be a child in the origin countries where people are coming from. In my among my interviewees, there was someone who started working as a shoe shiner in Guatemala as young as 3 years old, and he was very aware of what he was doing to support himself, his sister, and his mother. And he comes to the US context as a 14-year-old and he starts working here. And that isn't anything different from what that person has lived or the sort of framework that that person understands their social role and their everyday responsibilities from. But it is a deviation from Western normative or US ideas of childhood. So then we come into the picture, we design policies that reward people for following a trajectory of childhood. And in the immigration world, we can think of the DREAM Act or DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, that was sort of based on this idea that a child who grew up in US schools, who experienced Americanness by everything but their legal status, is deserving of protection. But what does that mean for a young person who got here at 9 years old, who began working because that's what they knew and that's what they had to do? And they very much are productive in the sense of their own meaning of productivity and survival, but they don't meet that criteria of childhood, or they don't meet that sort of the milestones of proving their worthiness of legal protection. So again, when we sort of come into a situation from the top down and we impose our frameworks on a crisis, we miss the lived experience. And when we ask young people, well, why are you working at the age of 9 as a dishwasher in a restaurant in the US? And they say, well, I've been doing this work since I was 4, you know? That is their framework. And we should design policies in ways that reflect the human experience, not the human expectation of what is good.
I want to get, before we wrap up our segment, the opportunity for you to talk about the role of community support and how that plays out.
Yeah, community support was perhaps the most important factor in the outcomes that I observed among young people. I explained two separate trajectories of unaccompanied, undocumented youth workers in the US. One that sort of ends, as I observed it, in a place of adaptation, adjustment to life in the US, and another one that ends at a place of perdition, which doesn't translate beautifully, but perdición in the Spanish language is a loss, an angst, a loss of self, and a loss of one's future, and the goals that you set for yourself. So the difference between experiencing adaptation and perdition for unaccompanied young people was that community support, meaningful social ties that allowed unaccompanied young people, so kids who are growing up without their parents, without an adult caregiver in the room, meaningful social ties that allowed them to feel witnessed is one thing that they describe. The witnessing, the good job, I see what you're doing, I admire the work that you're doing, which again, young people often provided for themselves over time, but also a place of desahogo, of unburdening, of venting. It's something we sort of take for granted when we grow up in families. Our parents are people, our siblings are people we vent to as children and talk about our days and our troubles. Young people don't have that when they're on their own. So, a place where they can unburden from their emotional pains, their material worries, those became really important to deciphering who ended up feeling adapted or adjusted, who ended up feeling perdition or a state of loss once in the US. So, anyone who can join a community where migrant children are being served, I encourage you to be a witness or to be a place of desahogo, of unburdening. And that makes all the difference for young people.
And so, for people who want to find out more about your book and the work that you have going on, please share with us how.
Yeah, everything I do, pretty much everything I do can be found on stephaniecanizales.com. You can pick up the book on Amazon. And if you like what you read, I really hope that you will leave a review.
And the truth is that you've spent a lot of time out in the migration field dealing with immigration. And as we talk about this, it becomes a hotbed political issue. Do you feel as though that, and I don't want to make it too political, but do you feel as though that the candidates and even those who are in Washington simply just don't get it?
I think what I'm observing is more like a short-term memory, right? In
Okay.
the last election cycle and the one before, unaccompanied children were, a hot topic. Um, we don't hear anything about migrant children today. We hear more and more the criminalization of Haitian immigrants. It was migrant children 4 years ago, 8 years ago, as the deviant potential gang affiliated young person. So, what I wish I would see more of is a sort of full circle conversation about, if you're going to talk about something as a problem, can you provide a solution, as opposed to just continually pointing out these hypothetical, straight up untrue, problems about new migrant populations, and vilifying one group in one election cycle, then another group in another election cycle. So I wish there was a little bit more of a memory and a sort of loop closing effort, so that we aren't just left with this resentment towards immigrant groups, as we are seeing across every single election cycle for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, a lot to pay attention to, and certainly got to have you back. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Dr. Stephanie L. Canizales, who is a leading immigration expert and the author of Sin Padres Ni Papeles. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All righty, we are taking a quick break, but guess what? We'll be back right after this. And welcome back. South Bronx Unite brings together neighborhood residents, community organizations, academic institutions, and allies to improve and protect the social, environmental, and economic future of Mott Haven and Port Morris. South Bronx Unite helps communities in the Bronx who suffer from injustice daily. Our next guest has devoted years of uplifting and protecting communities in the South Bronx. Joining me now is the founding member of South Bronx Unite, Mychal Johnson. Good to have you in front of me again, my brother.
Pleasure. It's always
How's
a
everything,
pleasure.
man?
Blessed.
Blessed?
Yes, blessed.
How's
Happy
life
to
in
be
South
here.
Bronx, brother?
It's always, we are standing up and fighting back. We always find ourselves having to respond to different things that are happening and happening to us.
Right.
But we're trying to plan for things to be happen for us that we create on our own. So it's a lot of good work to be done. We're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think about, the South Bronx area. If I go ahead, I look over there by Bruckner. I can go over there. I come over there by, right over there by the Willis Avenue Bridge.
Yes.
A lot of traffic coming through there.
A lot of traffic.
Right? And we know the Bronx has the highest asthma rate. We know the unhealthiness that is centered in the borough.
That's right.
But there's this environmental challenge, right? That I don't think that many times we pay particular attention to, or we don't pay enough attention to. How do you feel that we're dealing with the environmental challenge?
Yeah, the people who are experiencing it are paying attention to it, right? They're
Right.
breathing it in. Their children are running to hospitals because of it. They're sick or ailing. Not just the children, but also the seniors are really hurting. So what we're trying to do is push our elected officials and folks who are making these type of decisions that are top down, understand that they can't continue to do the same thing expecting different results. You can't say it's economic development and job creation when it's bringing in thousands of trucks through our neighborhood every day. You can't say it's good for us when you're reducing congestion maybe in Central Business District in Manhattan, but then we're taking the load of the trucks that are diverting from those tolls through our community, by our schools, where we live and breathe.
I need you to repeat that again because I think there's a lot that's said just right there. That New York City's dealing with congestion pricing right now,
Yes.
right? That means that you have the opportunity to go down there, pay to be in downtown. That's the price you pay for where you go.
Right.
However, there's diversion.
That's
Right?
right.
And everybody's not going downtown.
Right.
Some people have stopped at parking or going other ways, and that ends up in your backyard.
That ends up in our backyard, right? That ends up in the east, in Harlem, upper Manhattan, like Washington Heights and others. But in the South Bronx, we have been the subject of diversions from tolls, right? You have the RFK Bridge, the Triborough, right? Folks are trying to get around that toll.
Yeah.
Where they go? They go through the South Bronx.
Yeah.
So it's already happening. So if the plan that the MTA is proposing with this congestion pricing project is successful, their plan on their own acknowledgement will bring 4,000 more vehicles through the South Bronx every day. That's not right.
Right.
We're already suffering. You already talked about the high rates of asthma. We're already considered asthma alley. We can't take more for the team.
Right.
They need to be taking some for our team, which is suffering disproportionately.
We get to the place where we call it environmental justice, right? How do you define environmental justice as it relates to the South Bronx?
If it ain't just, it ain't right, right? We see it as environmental racism, because this happened to black and brown people more than it's happened to people who are not of color,
Right.
right? We don't see them placed in these types of facilities in other folks' communities, where we have power plants, we have waste transfer stations, where they handle all the Bronx waste in the South Bronx, in my neighborhood, right? Where we have 5 bridges and 3 highways, where we have the highest level of like heavy diesel truck intensive operations in the city happening through this one neighborhood. It's affecting our children's outcomes. Their cognitive development is directly linked to the air they breathe. So when you're talking about just asthma, we're talking about cognitive development, we're talking about occupational and educational outcomes. This is just generational hurt and harm. So justice is making sure we do things that are just and equitable, that we don't place everything in one community. That's not just, that's not equitable. So if we want it to be really justice, then you spread that burden out. You don't put it all in one community where you expect folks to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and keep being, the ones who go as the first responders, or what we called during COVID was the
Essential
workers.
Yes, sir.
So we're essential workers, right? We're the ones going to be there when everybody else wants to take social distance. But what about when we need to live and breathe and have thriving outcomes, and not just surviving but thriving?
Yeah. So a lot of conversation centers around pollution and environmental justice. So much so that it's attracted national attention, right? That when we look at what's going on across Bronx is considered one of the worst spots, in the nation.
Yes.
So when you look at that, know that, and have become a voice for the voiceless in that, the response that I get is, we hear you.
Yes. But are you going to act on that?
All right then, right, there we go.
We need
there you
action,
go.
man.
Right.
Don't
right.
just hear me. Let's act on that.
Right. And so talk to me about that action. I mean, the song says it's been a long time coming. We know a change is going to come, but has change really come?
Well, we were talking about capping the cross Bronx, and they talking about expanding it now in the same voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's not change. That's more the same.
Right.
That's why we have to work together. That's why we have to speak with a united voice. We have to vote with it, right? And we have to act on it together. Then we will start wanting to create change, because then we have the ability to either replace them as elected officials or really show the power of our collective body, right? Our people decide, I call them the sleeping giant, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't keep sleeping if we want something to change, because nothing comes to us sleeping but dreams, right?
Oh wow, you said it right. You said it there. That's right.
But we need to make it happen, and only we can do that.
Talk to me about this. I'm glad I got you with me, right? I'm with a friend of mine. He's got some property down right there in the South Bronx. We go up to his place and we look out the window, and we were saying, it's a tale of two cities right here.
Yes, sir.
On one side of the South Bronx, you have this new development, and then you look on the other side, right out the same window, and you see the projects, little or no improvement. How do you put that into perspective? Because there is this tale of like two cities
In one
Right.
community.
right in the one community.
Yes. It's like the old saying about crossing on the other side of the railroad track, right? So in our case, it's on the other side of the Deegan Expressway. So when you go south to where you see the Brookfield, $1 billion development, and all the high rise coming up and market rate housing being produced, it's not for us. What it was doing is raising up rents and taxes, and can potentially displace us.
Right.
So we've been trying to do what's called like principles for private development, meaning that we have to hold these people socially responsible. Like, what are you going to do other than just take from us? You know, you put in your building on our land, but what are you going to do about making sure that this community has some cohesion, has some economic opportunities, has some job creation? You know, you have folks who work to develop build these buildings, working in the construction field, aren't able to live in those buildings, right? Were they being paid union scale wages? So these types of things we have to hold these kind of developers accountable for, to make sure they're socially responsible on environmental, jobs, health and wellness, community cohesion, creating real opportunities for the people who live there and not just taking.
So I want to ask the question that's really on my mind for a minute. I look down there, I see a lot of these new developments.
Yes.
I see a lot of places. They're vacant. Nobody's in them. What response are you getting? I mean, what? The people are coming? What are they telling you?
Well, I mean, people opened up businesses down there, and they're closing because they're expecting this big wave to happen. But it's too late to roll that back, right? They've now built on these spaces and these places. How do we make sure those places are deeply affordable for people who really need it, or a mixed range of incomes that really meet our needs in our community? We have people who are teaching in our communities, can't afford to live in those places, right? We have young professionals coming back from college and from universities who want to come back and live where they grew up at and can't afford to live there. Those places shouldn't be sitting there vacant. They should be building those places for our people who have a certain level of income need that needs to be met.
Yeah.
You know, not just a higher level and not just all the way on the bottom either. There's a middle ground that needs to be met. We need a healthy reach of where we can reach some of the need that's required for folks to live in our neighborhoods.
At the top, it says you're the founding member of South Bronx Unite, right? When you look at where you are today, look at the issues that are germane to the South Bronx, you look at the fight, you look at the struggle. The question that I want to ask is, when it comes to the community, the South Bronx community, South Bronx residents, how many, I'm going to use the word, woke are there? Are we finding that the community is more woke to the issues at hand? Or are you finding that people are sleeping at the wheel?
I think people are resilient in our community. I mean, they've gone through a lot, man. Brother? I mean, a lot, and still there. And
Right.
still want to be there.
Right.
Shouldn't have to go somewhere else to get what everybody else got, right? I'm talking about access to quality of life enhancements. We live in a community with 60,000 people within 2.5 square miles. Very densely populated with one park. One park, St. Mary's. The rest are playgrounds that are asphalt. But we got an entire peninsula that was given to a developer off 106 acres of land, given for 99 years to one developer. No kind of public benefit. But we're working as a community now to saying this is what we want, right? So we are proposing, we're not just opposing. So our people are resilient and they're ready to fight and stand up and propose. I think we have to denormalize these situations. Can't nothing change? The only way things have ever changed in our society and the rights we have is always come from us fighting together, standing up. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to vote. Black people still be enslaved, right? Women wouldn't have the right to vote. No one would have a voice that they didn't fight for. So our community is ready. I think we just have to show them the way. We have to work together and not just hear them, but have action, right? It can't just be about talking about it. It got to be about being about it.
Right.
So we're trying every day to, build, support, organize, because it's really hard, and show our children and show those parents there's a way forward. We could do this.
So for the person who's out there watching right now saying, listen, what are some of the things, policy objectives, what are some of the things that you're advocating for right now that people need to be aware of and join the fight in, what would you tell them?
We're working on projects right now in the South Bronx, man. We're taking over and recovering back a property that was vacant since 2011. It was formerly the Lincoln Detox Center. It was formerly the People's Detox Center, created by the Young Lords and the Black Panthers to create acupuncture and Reiki for recovery. Rather than using methadone, they use holistic approach to health, to recovery. We won an RFP after doing a feasibility study. We're about to develop this property, create health, education, and the arts in this building, right? Reclaiming it for the community, create our own pathway towards better outcomes. Not expecting to come from the top down. They got to come from us because we are the experts. We live here. We know what we need.
Right.
But we have to propose that. We have to envision it, and they have to move towards that. And that same way with the waterfront we don't have access to, we created a waterfront plan, man, that was prioritized by the state in 2016. And we now push for EPA to fund it in tune $20 million. Now with this new administration, those funds may not come through, but we now have a better plan, though. And we just keep on pushing.
And you talk about that better plan, right? Because the plan that existed, you had a lot of challenges with,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
But you came out with a better plan.
Yes.
And coming out with a better plan really was able to win the hearts of many. Now it's just a matter of just funding the plan.
Yes.
So the person that's out there that's thinking about activism and whether or not it's really worth it. You've been on the field. I use this word on this show a lot, and I know people who work with me know I use this word a lot. I say boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Right. That's what activists do. Right. You put boots on the ground. You know the work. You do the work. You're about the work. Right. And so, give me a little bit about those activism right now, and are you seeing more and more people put the boots to the ground, get to work? Because when you're dealing with poverty and you're dealing with so many things, you're trying to deal with sustainability. I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to make it from day to day, and you want me to join a fight. And that fight can't take that energy away from me because I need this energy in order to survive. So sometimes I can't get in your fight.
Right.
Tell me what you were experiencing.
It's why we're fighting, who we're fighting for.
Right.
It's our children.
Right.
Right? They, of course, need somewhere to sleep, but they also need to be able to breathe. They need that. They need to have the same kind of outcomes anybody else has, and we're trying to work really hard to provide that for them, right? But if we aren't actively engaged in changing and creating that opportunity for them, it won't happen. No one's going to give it to them. I mean, we want our schools to be productive and create and provide them with really a deep education. But if we don't have a force in that, if we're not a force in that educational process, they may not get that education they need. And so we're trying to provide our community with the same thing. Like, we have to be civically engaged. We just can't care about where we sleep under that one roof, right? What happens outside of your door? What happens in your hallway or out front of your building, in front of your house? What happens on your street? What happens in your block? We can't just not pay attention. We can't just mind our own business. That's all our business, right? So we have to be involved. If you want to see something different, you have to create it.
Right. How do you balance the argument? Because I've had this conversation on the show, and the South Bronx has been right there at the forefront. I use the word gentrification.
Yeah.
Right? The person across the aisle from me says progression. Now, I will admit, I am for progression.
Yeah.
But how do you make the balance or the argument between progression and gentrification? Because we want to see communities look better.
Right.
But we want to also be included in the process.
Right. We got to create a process where we are the guardians of our own public trust. And what I mean by that is we've seen how public land has been used against us. Cross Bronx Expressway and others. Public land being built on with developments don't benefit us. What we saw as land has been that nucleus of the harm. That's been the main reason and how they've been empowering themselves over us. How can we take that back? So we created, and like others, we have 5 community land trusts in the Bronx and about 20 around the city, where community organizations are coming together who used to be CDCs, community development corporations like Nostradamus and others. They're now saying we're going to create community land trusts. So we can come together and produce what we want. So we can remove public land from the speculative market, right? So we can now stop the cycle of gentrification by rebuilding what we want. We want deeply affordable housing. Let's get public land, let's get some land, and let's create our own opportunity. So there's a pathway forward, and that's what we're trying to do now. Use the many tools we got that affords us to keep us being able to stay. Have progression without gentrification.
Right.
Being able to be in the South Bronx and live there like you always have, building out community and culture and relationships that you've fostered for decades, right? And generations. Why you have to go somewhere else to find healthy outcomes? So that's what we're trying to do.
So
Stay where we are.
I'll ask you the question. You know,
Yes.
like I said, you're the founding member, right? Yeah. With all the challenges that are, you know, we know about the air pollution, we know about the housing, we know about the crime, the quality of life, all these other things. Somebody's gonna say, bruh, you could pack up and go.
We can all pack up, then where are we?
Right.
But our children, a lot of us can't, right? So
Right.
if we know we got air quality issues, know what we're doing? We got 40 monitors around the South Bronx right now, about to put 25 more. We're gonna have a 65 node air quality monitoring network around from the Cross Bronx Expressway through the South Bronx. We got some in Riverdale, we got one in Riverdale, we got one in Governor's Island, we got one in Randall's Island, so we can know what the difference is. Right now we got people analyzing our data, so we can better tell our story. So that's air quality, that's
Right.
breathing.
Right.
So we're about actively changing that.
Right.
We're gonna help create legislation to stop the cycle of harm that's been placed on us. So that's active. That's being actively engaged in that one issue. Same thing with housing. Same way with community green space. We're trying to see what do we need to plug in at to solve our own problems. There's a lot to be done, but we go. It's incremental change, man. It ain't no video game.
Right.
Right. It ain't gonna happen right away.
Right.
It's gonna happen as we work towards it together, one step in front of the other, and we're seeing differences already.
I was reading this book recently. It's called Wicked Problems. Tell me how much time I got, because I don't have anything in my ear right now. How much time do I have? I gotta go? I was reading this book, Wicked Problems. I gotta leave on this one. But it talks about a wicked problem is a problem that may not necessarily be solved in my own lifetime.
Yes, sir.
And so for you, how do you feel saying I'm committed to it, even though this may go beyond?
We planting seeds for change.
That's why we bring him here. Mychal Johnson, founding
Yes, sir.
member of South Bronx Unite. You got to come back, brother. I enjoyed
Anytime.
the conversation.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. All right. Coming to the end of the show today. Hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum. Now, if you're rewatching this week's edition, catch free cablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, visit social media at BronxNet TV. And join us next week. We continue to elevate the discussion, bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care and God bless.